Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Design Recharge. I'm your host, Diane Gibbs, and I'm really excited to have my friend David O'Hara, or if you see him online, he has a P. I don't know what P is for, Paul, Peter.
Patrick.
Yep. But there's another David O'Hara that's in Dribbble that's David O'Hara. So you have to do David P. O'Hara. So I just want to make sure we all know that it's David Patrick O'Hara that we're talking about. And I always think it's so fun because your last name is like, I think it's Scarlett O'Hara, deep, deep South and Gone with the Wind stuff. So
Totally.
And Jason's calling you out right here from the get-go. Frostholm saying you owe him a podcast too. So
we have definitely talked about that. Let's hook it up soon.
All right. So we're going to get started. So David is actually on his vacation, dialing in from Canada today. Yep. So I'm really excited that he gave us some of his time during his vacation. So, David, you worked, I'm real excited to have you, by the way. So
sure. Yeah. I'm excited to be here.
I did kind of have to convince you a little bit in a car ride because he was so nice, such a gentleman, walked me back to my car. And then I said, well, I'll just drive you back to your hotel. And so then on that trip, I convinced him to be on the podcast.
Yep.
So I want people to give a little bit of background. So you worked for a while right after school as a designer in Pensacola, Florida.
Yep.
And you had,
there.
Okay. And how long was that?
That was about 3 years that I was at that agency.
All right. So you're at the agency, but you had this kind of inner calling, or you felt like you needed to go somewhere else. And there's not much places you could go east. So you had the call to go west, and you went way west.
Yeah, very far west.
All right. So you was it specifically you felt like the call to go to Seattle?
Yeah, I think there was like a few things to that. Like growing up, it's really strange, but just like Seattle was on my radar for some reason. Like I always thought of them as like a really cool place. Thought of it as very forward thinking, a lot of cool things going on there. So I found like a lot of my designs, some of the like dummy copy that I would put in there, it was always a Seattle address, which is just kind of funny because I never like actually thought I would live there. But it was just something that I, did. And then when I met my wife, she was originally from Seattle area. And so that was a big piece of us choosing Seattle, is wanting to move back to be near her family. And also the design community there is really thriving. And there was a lot of opportunities there. So it was like, sweet, let's do it,
So you went to Seattle. So where did you meet your wife? Did you meet her in Pensacola?
I did. She was at school, in nursing school down there.
At the same school you were at?
Yep.
No way. That's a long way away.
Totally.
So she was ready to go back. Okay. So,
yep.
So you just kind of want to paint the picture. So and you told me a little bit more, and you can decide if you want to share that with them or not, but you had this urge to move, but you had really no connections besides your wife's family. And I don't think your wife's family's in design, right?
No.
Okay. So tell me about what went into the decision, not necessarily to go to Seattle, but actually to move, and then how you made relationships in the field that it made relationships within Seattle, the Seattle design community.
Sure. So, I had been at that agency for a while, 3 years, and I had learned so much. Like, I'm really, really grateful for that experience because, straight out of school, like you've done all these certain design projects and everything, but then getting that real world experience teaches you things like one time I accidentally flattened an entire website. It was a PSD. And I just finished it and I flattened it, saved it by accident. And I remember going into my boss and just being like, so I flattened that PSD and saved that file. And this was before that there was PSD history and whatnot.
That's what Brian just wrote.
Yeah,
history.
Exactly. And so he's like, well, you learned a really valuable lesson today that you always make a copy. And so, you know, that it was lessons like that that I learned at that agency, of like establishing good habits and a lot of the production process that really wasn't taught in school. Um, so that was really good. But after, you know, about 3 years, I felt like I'd really hit a ceiling. I was doing much of the same thing over and over again. Um, and I felt like I had learned a ton, but I felt just restless. Like,
Mm.
I feel like I'm not being stretched. I'm not growing as much as I would like to be right now. At the same time, you know, I had been married for about a year at that point, and you know, my wife was missing her family, and so we had been talking about like, hey, like, what if we moved to Seattle? Like, what would that look like? And so I had started looking on job sites and connecting with recruiters in Seattle. And I just kept hearing from all of them, like, hey, like, we like your stuff. We think we can find you some stuff, but you have to be up here for us to present you. And so it was kind of this barrier that I needed to be physically there. I had also connected through a job site with a company and did some freelance work for them. And they were like, hey, if you move up here, we have a job opening up, and you know, we think you would be a good fit. And
Because you had
so,
already done some work for them, right?
right,
So
yeah,
you'd
I had
already
already
proven yourself.
totally, I'd already done a couple projects, and so I was like, okay, you know, this is great. So we were just kind of waffling on taking the plunge, right? Because it's a scary change, it's a big move. Moving across the country that far costs a lot of money as well. And so then it was a Friday, my boss comes into my office and he says, hey, you know, can I talk with you for a minute? It was kind of one of those, you're like, oh boy, what's going on? And then he closes the door and you're like, oh boy. And so he sits down and he's like, so I just wanted to come and talk with you. You know, the agency this was like right around the time of the oil spill. So the agency had hit some difficult time because a lot of our clients were tourism related and whatnot. So it was definitely struggling. And he was like, you know, we've made the decision that we have to let this other designer go on the team. And I was close with this other designer. And um, so he's like telling me this, and I'm just like going, oh, and I could tell it was really hard for him. Like, he really didn't want to do this. And he was literally about to walk into her office and let her go. And I was like, hey, can you wait till Monday? And he's like, sure, why? And so I gave him a little bit of information about like, hey, you know, Emily and I, which is my wife, we've been thinking about making this change, and you know, we've been pondering it for a while. Let me go home and talk to Emily and then get back to you on Monday. And you know, if we make that decision, then you can let me go instead. And it was definitely like, making that decision was scary. You know, it was like a lot of unknowns there. But you know, went home, talked to Emily, and we were both like, you know what, like, let's do it. We felt like this was an opportunity, though a scary opportunity. It was an opportunity for us to make a change, and you know, to kind of scratch that itch I had been feeling. And so, you know, I went in Monday and told him to let me go instead. And
So
it was
that's a
interesting.
pretty clear sign when somebody is like, you know, sometimes I feel like that's the way God works. You know, he's like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm giving you this urge, and then you got it, and then it's like, whoa, you're gonna have to really make a decision, because fall on the sword kind of right now, you
Right.
know?
Totally. So it was definitely scary. But you know, fast forward, we got up here and or up to Seattle, and we moved into my wife's parents' basement. So I am living with my in-laws. My wife had a connection at a doctor's office, so she was working. And it was, I'm not gonna lie, like, it was a really challenging time. Like, I think it was 7 months that it took for me to get another creative job. And I think a lot of that was several things. You know, it was learning the differences in the Seattle market. The Seattle
Mm.
market was very digital focused, which I had been doing a lot of, but I had also been doing a ton of branding and print. And so my portfolio was geared more that way. And so I had to learn about that. I had to learn that the Seattle market was very much all about relationships and connections with people. And if you didn't have any of that, then you were kind of in a challenging place trying to get your foot in the door. And so, I'm like in the basement, probably applying to like 20 to 30 places a day, like literally just sending out resumes. And it was difficult because, I'm feeling like a glorified chauffeur for my wife, just taking her to work every day, feeling like I'm not contributing. And then on top of that, my in-laws have always had very traditional jobs, and so for them, like, you go and knock on doors and talk to people face to face, and they didn't see me doing that, and so I was getting a lot of pressure. Her dad, I think, sat me down and talked to me like 3 different times saying like, hey, so you should be out there like talking to people. And I tried to like explain to him that, oh, I'm applying to many places online, but I think it was a concept that was hard for them to really grasp. And so I was getting, pressure from that standpoint. And so it was hard at that time. And so I literally went to Target and went and applied for a cart boy position because I wanted to just get something, going. And it looks like maybe the video froze.
Yeah.
Right, can you guys still hear me?
Yep. I still
Okay,
hear
cool.
you.
And so, okay, good. So applied for this cart boy job, and they're like, oh, we're not going to hire you because you're too overqualified. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, I just want a job. Like, I'll go push carts, I'll go do whatever, just to, get some income going. And then, I just couldn't get anything like that. I went to Starbucks, all the gamut, and ended up getting a job at a commissary at a military base. So I was a rep for like Colgate and Hormel and all these different brands, making sure they were profitable at the agency or at the commissary. So like a grocery store.
Right.
And it definitely wasn't, what I had pictured happening. And, that job that I had been working and doing some freelance work for, that position fell through and they didn't end up hiring for it. And so it kind of left me hanging.
Right. So can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay. So I would think that confidence, and I also think your father-in-law doesn't see who you're connecting with online, because also talking would be what we were doing on Twitter and connecting with people. And so you really had to kind of reformat your whole portfolio, as well as start these relationships. And relationships ended up being key. And I actually think it's probably like that everywhere, David, to be honest. I think that's how it was in Denver. That's how it is in Atlanta. That's how it is here. I mean, it's just incestuous. I used to think that was a bad thing. I mean, I know incest is a bad thing, but but it being incestuous in a way is kind of a relief to some extent. It means that if people get to know you, they can see that you're a good designer. You don't have to be the best designer, but that you have good skills, that you're trainable, that you have a good spirit, and that you can come into an office and not have to be one, the big man on campus. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's some humility, and I definitely think, but it definitely could really hurt on your confidence. So that was one of the things I loved when you and I were talking at Creative South, as you were nice enough to walk me to my car. I said, because you said, oh, I haven't had just the best, job experience. I've had kind of I had a shaky start, maybe. I mean, maybe not in Pensacola, but you had a shaky start once you got to Seattle. But then you got a job, and then you lost that job. And you were like, I'm not where I want to be. And I think, that is exactly why I want you to be here, because because you are at a good place now. And I feel like sometimes people just need to remember there are these valleys, but you get through them. And I thought, man, you have such a great attitude, and you were still doing these side projects, and you were working on all kinds of things, and you just didn't seem to let it get you down. And I guess you were okay sharing that story, sharing that valley, sharing that desert story before, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, I think it's a big part to understand that, hey, there will be times when things are great, and there will be times when they're not so great. And, allowing yourself the space to work within that. And, we can definitely, talk through the experience, uh, basically like catching up to the point where I was just laid off most recently. I was at I finally got a creative job at an agency there in Seattle. I was there for about 3 years. And, we can talk a little bit about, transitioning from visual design to user experience design. But, fast forward a few jobs, I was at a place that was super great, a great startup, had been there about 2.5 years, and then they had a layoff. And, I was a part of that layoff. I was working on 2 different products at that company. And it definitely was hard because at that point, the further you progress in your career, like, and the older you get, you have like a mortgage now, and you have, some people might have kids that they're
Right.
trying to take care of, and you have a family. And so for me, it was like, oh boy, like I kind of had felt like something was going on, but at that point it's jumping back to those relationships that you've been building all along. And going back a ways, how I ended up getting into the market is I started attending events. I would look on meetup.com, find design events going on, got involved in Dribbble. So I would attend these events, meet people, try to choose 1 or 2 people that I would meet and reconnect with them after that event. And then, I had somebody reach out to me on Dribbble that was in the area, and he worked with freelancers often and wanted to grab coffee. So I went, met with him. We didn't know each other from Adam at that point, but now he's my business partner. We've done countless projects together. So you never know, like somebody reaches out to you. Don't ignore that. Don't feel like, oh, like, it's not going to be that important. It could be huge for you, right? Like definitely make that connection. Another piece of it is recruiters. I've learned this. So like for designers, especially as you get more and more experience, recruiters can almost become annoying a little bit where, they're constantly emailing you. And I would just encourage people, like, don't be rude to them. Make sure that you're cordial, be straight and to the point with them. I'm usually like, hey, thanks for reaching out to me. I appreciate your interest. I'm really stoked in the role I'm at right now, but let's stay connected for the future. Because it turned out like in this most recent job that I got, as I came to the company and started talking to them, the recruiter was like, hey, you probably don't remember me, but you talked to me like 2 years ago. And I was really impacted by like how kind you let me down by declining me. And she was like, so when I saw your resume come through, it was awesome. I was like, oh, I can vouch for this guy. He's great. Just based on that small interaction we had.
Wow.
So definitely, like, as recruiters contact you, keep those connections, make the connection on LinkedIn, because you never know when you're thrust into a situation where you're laid off. You can start reaching back out to those contacts. Another thing that I do is I try to meet with a new designer every month, just for coffee, or maybe, hey, let's meet up at this event. And then I try to reconnect with someone that I have already previously connected with. So I try to do that. I don't always get it done in a month, but that's something I try to do. And it's really been great just to see, like, now a lot of the people that I've met are spread across Seattle in many different companies. And if something happens to my job, I can reach out to them and say, hey, like, I'm starting to looking for new
Right.
opportunities. If you know of anything, let me know.
Right. And I think sometimes it's just letting people know, letting the people in your network know what you're looking for, and that you're available, or you're available for freelance, or you're available for something. The other thing is just making sure that you, I think with UX UI, or not going from visual to more user experience, which is definitely maybe not as visual as what, I mean, I think UI is still visual, right?
Hmm.
But UX sometimes is a lot more user empathy and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
it's very behind the scenes sometimes.
right. And talking about customers and what they would like, it still maybe you might interact with the people who are doing the interface, whatever. But you have, it's a different kind of people. And these companies that are popping up, sometimes they don't always make it. And so it's really, there are recruiters for designers, but they're not as many sometimes. So I think in your field, having that, man, that is great advice about just being nice and letting them down nicely. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So next question. So you go, and now you worked for Microsoft. You did a 6-month contract for them. I mean, you do some amazing, really good work. But I know that one of the things that really stood out to me when we were talking last week, even, it was like sometimes our confidence in ourselves starts going. We
Hmm.
start, man, am I just a crappy designer, or am I just this? Or do you know what I mean? And it's always that it's, instead of it being the wrong time for this company or the wrong time for this company, we start thinking of it as me, there's something wrong with me. And I think we do
Hmm.
this when we're dating, a lot of times. I mean, some people don't. Some people have a little too big a head in that respect.
Totally.
But you don't have that, or maybe you did, but it didn't come across. Like, you just kept going, and you had such like I mean, not cocky at all, very humble, but you just kind of had that inner feeling that it just wasn't the right time, or it just wasn't the right place, but I'm not going to give
Hmm.
up. Because some people will leave because it's too hard. It took 7 months and it's too hard to do. So what kept you going? Because I think you had a lot of outside pressures coming in.
Yeah, I think, with the layoff from Moz, which is the most recent one I've gone through, the first thing was just, I believe everything happens for a reason, realizing that, God is in control of this situation. And it's no surprise to him that, I'm in this place. And so, just having that as a foundation, I think was a big help to me, in knowing that, okay, like, God's got this, but now I have to get to work and start making things happen and looking for opportunities and going after them. So like I was talking about, turning to the relationships
Mm,
that you've built along the way. Believing in yourself is a big piece too. Believing that, hey, I'm going to put my best work forward, and not everybody, it's not going to fit in
right.
every, because all these different companies, it's like there's a puzzle piece right here, and they're looking for specific check marks on their list of things that they need. And, with the work that you put forward, you have like, with some companies you have a day or maybe even just a couple hours interviewing with them, and if you don't quite uh, represent all of those things in that time frame, they may pass on you. You may have been a great fit for the role, they may have been impressed by you, but they might decline you. So after that layoff, I turned all my connections, started boom boom boom, interview. I interviewed at Facebook, Google, Uber, Curate. I was declined by all of them. Now I went through the process. So, and it's hard because that eats up time too. Like, each of these companies, their process is like 3 to 4 weeks long. And so you go through 2, 3, 4 interviews, and um, then they turn you down, and you're like, man, I've just worked so hard to like get through that gamut that I just went through, and then I come out on the other end without a job, and that's hard. But I think realizing that, um, just because they didn't hire you then, doesn't mean that um, you have no opportunity there. And maintain those connections with the people that you talk to, connect with them on LinkedIn, follow up with them and say, hey, like, what could I do to improve next time? Because I got feedback from some of them that, like, hey, it just seemed like you were a bit rusty interviewing. Others, it was like, hey, we wanted to see a little bit more mobile experience. And so don't be afraid to follow up and say, hey, thanks so much for your time, interviewing me. If you don't mind, it would be great if you could share some feedback on what you think I should work on improving.
I think that's great. Just one, reaching out, and two, being okay with not being okay with receiving feedback, because then again, it leaves that good taste in their mouth with you, because it may not have been a good fit right now, but it doesn't mean that it won't be a good fit in the future. So Anna wanted to know oh my goodness, how were all those interviews? How many interviews did they put you through? So on average, it wasn't just one interview. Sometimes it's multiple, and you're meeting with multiple people on different teams, right?
Totally. So it's usually 2 to 3, sometimes 4 interviews. So usually there's like a phone screen that they do with you, and it's like 30 minutes. And it's usually the recruiter just making sure you fit the basic qualifications and connecting with you and making sure that you fit their culture. And then they usually have you meet like a hiring manager and talk with them. Sometimes that's just a phone call or a video conference. And then the next one is usually on site, and you might meet with 2, 3. Sometimes it's a full day, sometimes it's a half day. Usually those sessions are you have a portfolio presentation, and then throughout the day you have one-on-ones with different key people, and you usually go through a lot of whiteboarding exercises because they're trying to really understand how you think and your perspective on things. And so I think they go through that process to do all that. But I would say, like, already talking with Google, they've reached out to me again already, like since then. And they, the recruiter there was like, hey, before I got a job with Google, I applied and was declined 5 times before I finally got into Google.
Wow.
So I think one of the things that is important, and a lot of us think, oh, well, Facebook doesn't like me, so I guess, I'll just cross them off my list. It's like, no, like if you want to work for them, be persistent and, follow up with them. Then 6 months later, reapply again, connect with those people you had already connected with, and follow up with them and say, hey, like, I'm interested in taking a look at your team. Is there anywhere where I'd fit? And I've even had it to where I connected with one of them and said, hey, it was someone on the Amazon Alexa team, said, hey, let's go grab coffee if you don't mind, one morning before work. I'd like to just ask you some questions about your team. And he met me for coffee. We chatted about his team and the things that he was looking for in a team member. So
I think sometimes it's just about knowing, getting to know them on a personal level instead of, you're definitely talking about work stuff, but it's like what's important to them. Not that you're trying to like take notes and manipulate yourself to be that, but you also could get an idea of if it's not really a good fit. And then you also get an idea as, you might know somebody who really would fit. It's just about being friends with people, not necessarily like networking. I kind of hate that word networking, but there's no other way to kind of talk about it, but I really think you need to take it. There's like the creepy car salesman kind of networking, and then there's the creative South kind of networking, right? And where you're friends and you actually talk about real things and you go grab coffee, not just to get a job, but you do it right. But it's a continuous process that you're hopefully meeting with these people at other events and you're seeing them, and then but you've had these real conversations. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's being transparent too. It's easy when you go into an interview to try to put up this facade of like, here's what I'm trying to sell you. Right. And it's so hard to kind of balance that. Right. But you want to try to show that you're a human and that bring out some of your personality in that as well. So like connecting with those people, I think, on a more personal level is a really great tool.
So you have an amazing story. I asked because a lot of designers are not extroverted, and you're pretty extroverted. But so I asked you, I was like, have you always been like this? Has it always been easy to talk to people? Because I think a lot of us have to practice that. I just talk to myself in the mirror. When I was a kid, like, anyway, I still do, even, to be honest. That probably makes me seem crazy. But or what made you come out of your comfort zone? Will you tell your high school story?
Sure, yeah. I think, I definitely don't see myself as extroverted. I probably come off that way to some people, but I think, being in crowds or connecting with people, it exhausts me. Like I'm exhausted afterwards. And it's, even doing something like this, it's not 100% comfortable. It's scary, right? To put yourself out there and to let people see all the bumps and edges that aren't perfect about you. And I think, it's kind of getting to a place where you're okay with people seeing the imperfections about you, and that's hard. It's definitely not easy, and it's a process that even now, like, it's still hard to do. But I would say, yeah, back in high school, I was probably like many on the call here today. I was that kind of art nerd at school. I was always in the art lab or in the computer lab, and so I wasn't very outgoing or popular necessarily. I wrestled in high school, and I think one thing that was really helpful to me in helping me become the way I am today was that wrestling experience, because it's just you, an opponent on the mat in front of a crowd, and it's all up to you. It's not, oh, you can't blame it on Johnny who didn't do his part on the team. If you lose, it's on you. And I think my first 2 to 3 years, I lost almost every match. And that was humiliating. Like, I literally would have guys come out there and just like play with me on the mat until they finally decided they were going to pin me. And it was really humiliating.
But how did you
um,
not give up? Because that's, again, another one of your like superpowers, is that your ability to not give up. You weren't going to give up, and you didn't give up. You know what I
yeah, I
mean? Because
think
3 years is a long time to just keep losing. Like, your parents aren't like, David, buddy, maybe this isn't the sport for you, right?
totally. I think at that point, I really wanted to do well at wrestling. And I knew that if I worked hard at this, I could get better. And it's one of those things where it doesn't happen overnight. It's the
No.
same thing, when I made the change from a visual designer to a UX designer. It was hard. Like, I had made it up to a senior visual designer level, and then I had to start again at the bottom, and work my way back up. And it took 4 to 5 years to get back up to that senior level again. And it's hard, and you got to work hard at it. And eventually, my last 3 years of wrestling, I was winning a lot. My last year, I was undefeated until my last tournament,
Uh,
and then I lost my last three matches, which really sucked because they were the same guy.
oh,
But yeah, it was just one of those really challenging things. But yeah, and I think it also helped me in that situation to, even though I was undefeated, like, it was definitely an opportunity for me to be super proud and of that. But then when I lost, I was like, hey, he beat me, good job. And being able to take a loss and learn from it and move forward.
well, and
Uh,
that's like when somebody gets the job and you don't. That's exactly
right.
it. Like, well,
Yeah.
they must have been a better wrestler, you know?
Mm. Yeah, I think also just looking at the situation and saying what can I learn from this mistake, this failure, and then being better the next time because of it. I think also, in addition to wrestling, my last year of high school, somehow I ended up being class president. Like, it was like kind of weird, but it worked out to where everybody was voting, and the guy who was voted class president took a different position, and I was the second most voted for. And so then I was class president, and so I had to get up and speak in front of people and organize things. And I had to give the announcements to the entire school every morning, and I was petrified, like absolutely petrified. And so I had to learn to get over my nerves and cope with that and be able to do that. And then at the end of the year, I had to give a speech in front of 1,500 people. And believe me, I was really scared. But somehow, I managed to a lot of it's mental, right? It's all in your head. And so working through that and learning to coach yourself through okay, you're just going to go out there and you're going to do your best and leave it on the mat is what we always said in wrestling, So kind of no matter what you're going to do, go out, do your best and leave it on the mat.
So let's talk a little bit about, I love that. I love that that it was this practice every day and you didn't want to do it, but you did it. And you knew that there was an end, but you did it. And I bet you got better by the end of it. And now, you could give a talk to 1,500 people, but you also, you know what I mean? That's really encouraging that you just didn't give up. You're a beaver. Did you know that?
No.
I have a thing with beavers. I'll have remember to give you some stickers at Creative South. Anyway, I'll tell you about the beaver later. They know about the beaver. So let's talk about going from a visual designer to UX designer. And let's talk about that, stepping back, because that's hey, I just moved here. I make this. I think I should make this. But now you're back with these newbies. And that can be kind of a killer to your pride, which pride's not a great thing anyway. I mean, it can be good, right? Confidence is good, but pride maybe not the best. But because you had to take a cut somewhat financially, right? Or is it just because you're in Seattle, everything's more expensive?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a gap in what companies pay visual design versus user experience design. And I think a lot of that might be centered around just how much they end up touching within whatever product that they're selling or whatnot within the company. And so I didn't end up taking a pay cut whenever I did that. But it definitely wasn't, it wasn't at the level that you would you see a job position posted and you see the amount that, it says it pays. It definitely wasn't what the going rate was, because you have to start at the bottom and you have to be okay with that.
But if you had been a senior designer, a visual designer in Seattle, more than likely it would have been a pay cut to go back to UX, maybe?
I would think if it was at an agency, a creative agency again, it would have been. But my move was going from a creative agency to Microsoft. Microsoft pays probably the best, or up there with the best in Seattle, as far as there's probably Amazon, Microsoft, and they pay very competitively. So I think for my situation, it ended up not being a pay bump or a pay decrease. But had I stayed in the creative agency realm, I think it probably would have been.
So what kind of things did you have to give up to start over? Because one, there's I know everything that I was supposed to do. It was easy and you could coast to some extent, but that was what you didn't really like. You were hey, I'm not being challenged. So that's a plus. But then what other things did you have to give up? Because I think there are some people maybe in the chat here who are thinking about, yeah, you know what, maybe I want to do this user experience thing, or maybe I want to go from being a print designer to a web designer. Do you know what I mean? And there are some things that you give up. So what were some of those?
Yeah, I think, as a senior designer, you're leading other designers on a project. So you're kind of up there in this role where you're orchestrating things and you have a lot of general knowledge that you've built up, that you're able to, give insight to them and insight into the project. And a lot of times, at least my experience was, I was very client facing. So you're constantly, with the customers. But then moving to the bottom of the ring again, you're brand new, you don't have all that knowledge. And so you basically turn yourself into a sponge and try to soak up as much as you can. Making that move from the creative agency to Microsoft was very scary. And I'll just like camp on that for a second. Um, as I've like looked back and talked about some of this, I realized that like um, a lot of these points in my life and career have been really scary changes. And it's easy when something is scary to say, nope, like I would rather be comfortable. I'm not going
Yeah.
to do that. I'm not going to take that risk. But um, I would just say if something scares you and it aligns with your beliefs, it aligns with where you want to head with your career or your life, then do it. Because every time, like, yeah, it was really scary and the process might have been really hard. But at the end of the day, I've been so happy that I have put myself out there, stretched myself, made myself grow. Um, and done those scary things. I mean, it's led me to do other ridiculous things like jumping out of airplanes and things like that. Where, you know, I'm not. I promise I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but I think I've come to this place where I like to push myself to do things that scare me, and maybe that makes you feel like you're living more. Um, but so that change from the creative agency to Microsoft. I remember the first day I was going in, talking to my wife and being like, uh, you know, I feel like I'm going to go in there my first day and they're going to realize that I'm a fraud, that I'm not a UX designer at all, and they're going to send me home. um, you know, and so I just remember that scary feeling and just remember being like, this is Microsoft, like the Microsoft, and like how am I going to contribute on the level of these people? Because I put them all on a pedestal, right? Like
Mm.
they must be amazing and all this. And what I've come to learn, like through talking with companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Airbnb, name them all, right? They're all people just like you and me,
Right.
and they all are figuring it out just like you and me, and they're all at just different stages of that, right? And and so you have to have confidence that, hey, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do my best and I'm going to learn and soak all this up, and then I'm going to up my level of contribution. And so going in, it was a great experience at Microsoft. Worked as part of their Office Labs team. So the people who were working on the like Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and all that. And so worked with that team, learned a ton while I was there, and then had an opportunity to go to another company at like that was a UI visual designer position at Microsoft. So it was a good like transition position to a UX design role, because it was kind of doing an in between where I was still doing some visual design. I was also doing UI design and tinkering in UX and being involved in that process in the team. Then moving to the other company, I was able to come in and lead two product positions, which were really great.
That's cool. So Brian has a question. Brian White, always good for good questions. Do you ever see yourself running your own design studio in the future, or are you looking to stay in the job market for the long term?
Oh, that's a good question. I ran a small design shop in Seattle for a few years. It was, super small. We were just working with small customers, so restaurants, a lot of coffee shops, people building apps. We had 3-person team, and so we had a developer, a motion designer, and me. And we did all of that. It was, I learned a ton from the experience, and I did this in addition to a full-time job as well, which was really hard because it was basically like do your job all day and then come home and do your agency work all day or all night and then go to sleep and get up and do it again. And so that was definitely challenging. And I found what I was not good at was charging enough.
Hmm.
I will always undercut myself, just because I wanted to get the project, and it's definitely that balance that you have to be able to strike there, of charging what your value is,
Right.
and charging what can help you make a living. And so after like 2 or 3 years of doing that on the side, we decided to transition out of that just because it was a little more than we felt was going to really take off and be able to do it full time. Um, and so to answer Brian's question, I really like working within the product space. And so I think if I were to do my own thing, it would be a product versus a creative services agency. And so we'll see, what the future holds for that.
All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I want to just make sure we so when you were at Microsoft, you were doing UI work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then transitioning, you started doing little projects. Is that kind of for that were part of it would be UX? And so, because I think a lot of people think of those as synonymous. So sometimes at some companies, you are a UX UI designer, right?
Yep.
You're doing both. So really you've even filtered even further down. So you're doing one of the things I was like, well, send me some stuff. And you're like, well, most of the stuff's not visual anymore. And so I just kind of I'm going to share my screen real quick and then pull up some stuff because I like for people to be able to see what you're doing. So then, because people always say in the comments, hey, I wish we could see some of the stuff. So this is his website. So it's davidpohara.com. And you have had, so one is product designer, entrepreneur, and user experience. And so you have had a good many kind of entrepreneurial ventures. So Moz was one of the companies that you worked for, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And what kind of stuff were you doing for them?
So that was the company I went to after Microsoft, and I was working on a new product for them called a content management tool. Mm-hmm. And so that was, going through and understanding the user needs mm-hmm. that were in the field. We did a lot of research. So, basically getting on a call like this with the people that we were building the tool towards and getting input from them, understanding what their everyday process is like. And so that helped inform what we were building because understanding like, oh, okay, they do this and they do this and they use this tool and this piece is a big pain point for them. And so coming back to that, helping to build a tool that will make their workflow better in the long run was one of the things that I was working on. There was another product that was centered around Twitter analytics. Mm-hmm. So that was one that I worked on there as well. But it was centered around content on someone's site, understanding how that content was performing and starting to give insights into here's the things you should be doing to make your content perform better for you.
Right. And so this, you did the branding, plus you were also doing what the web looked like. So you were using kind of all of your skills, which at smaller companies, you would probably still have some of those. I'm just trying to kind of paint the picture for people who are thinking, because I don't know how big the company you work for right now, but they do tasers, right?
Yeah, so the company I work for now is called Axon, and they do taser weapons, the hardware, and they also do the body cams. Mm-hmm. I work on the software for that. But yeah, like the project you were showing there was VRV. That was a freelance project that I did for a company, and they didn't end up using it at the end. But that was
boogers.
Was
I can't get you back. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, now I've got it.
Where they literally came to me and was like, we want to do RVs for people just like Airbnb does. And they were like, we want our site to look just like Airbnb. And I'm like, well, the experience might be different for people, renting RVs than, renting a home. There might be some similarities and whatnot. And so I kept trying to push them to do some research for it.
Right.
And at the end of the day, they're like, nope, we want Airbnb. Like, exactly. And I'm just like, well, okay. And at the end of the day, I had to, create what they were wanting. And I tried to kind of push them toward a different experience as much as I could. But to me, this project is very similar to Airbnb. It's more of showing off the branding.
But in a way, maybe that helped you get some interviews because, right? So or it might help you in some future if you
Yeah.
ever, right?
It's funny because I ended up interviewing with Airbnb, and it was a point of like when they reached out to me, I was like, oh dear, like they're gonna look at that and be like, this is basically just our site. And so it was funny when I went and talked with them. I was just like, yeah, like I explained exactly what I just said, and this client wanted that, and they were like, oh yeah, we get it, like and they like different aspects of it and everything. So
Right. So, um, you already kind of talked about feeling like a poser or like you were going to be found out at Microsoft. Did that happen again anywhere else? Because I think sometimes when we go to a new job, it can be difficult. And one of the reasons you stayed at Axion, AXION, right?
it's AXON.
AXON. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. It's
Um,
okay.
don't put an I in Axon, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, Derek wants to know where that dope hat is from.
Oh, I think I got this when I was traveling in California.
So
At like
RV, like,
RVCA, yep, is the brand. And it was like at a surf shop, I think.
oh, cool.
So glad you like it.
So Derek's been to Creative South too. He lives in Boulder. All
Cool.
right. So, um, when you it was the Maz job that you lost. They were
Yep.
going under or
Yeah.
something. They were
They
downsizing, right?
they cut 28% of their workforce. So they cut like almost our whole design team was cut. And so that's when I started interviewing at all those places. Based on connections that I had already made, started reaching out to them and connecting with some of those different companies.
So you had already been doing the coffee thing. It wasn't like this was new. So now you were
Right.
just putting this in place. And this wasn't like your back door, I'm going to always do this and always have an ulterior motive. It was that you were really trying to make new friends and expand your network. But you were also doing it on LinkedIn. You were
Mm-hmm.
doing, I was just trying to give some hints because I think that this is one of those awesome things that you did have faith that you would get through this, just like you staying on the mat, like keeping going. And with wrestling, you knew you could get better and that maybe it wasn't a right fit. And I just think, man, that is such a piece that you had that. And one of the things you did, you have 50 states, right? So 50 states, I'm going to pull that up and hopefully I can pull it up pretty quickly. But so you volunteered for me at Creative South, and you, man, you know when I see it underneath and it just won't let me like click it. It keeps going away. That's what it was. So you were a volunteer, and we do this we do a Zoom thing with all the volunteers. So not that, I mean, I have different days. So you might not be volunteering with the actual people, but I get to see you, you get to see me, and then you guys get to meet each other. And so one of the things, one of my students was going to be volunteering, and she had this amazing painting behind her that she was working on. And then we used you as an example because I said, oh, well, tell them what you do. And so this is one of the years that 50 states was just kind of coming out. So tell people what 50 states is, kind of like you did that day when I was having you meet my student. And I'm going to pull it
Sure.
up.
So 50 states is what it probably sounds like. It's apparel centered around the states. It's a community of designers that submit designs, and we help them produce and promote those shirts. And it's been kind of a passion project of mine. And I also work with a 7-team developer team here in Seattle as my business partners. And I have always loved t-shirt design. And I was traveling, and all of the I think I went to California, and I wanted to get a shirt for just to kind of remember my trip by, and all of the shirts were horrible. And I was like, wait, this is California. It's like the most hip place on earth supposedly, and there's like no cool shirts for it. And So I was disappointed by that. And literally on the plane flight back from California, I was like, what if there was this place you could go to and get like cool apparel for any state that you went to and visited? So kind of this like patriotic type minded thing. Every person has a deep sense of place and meaning to that place for them, whether that's home to them, whether it's a place they love. And so that was something that I really wanted to highlight. And so going to, several designers and talking to them about the idea, they thought it was cool. And so it kind of was born from there. And it's been going for about 2 to 3 years now. And we've just been learning along the way. Definitely haven't done everything perfect, and the initial hesitation that I had when you asked me to come on is I was like, oh, I don't feel like 50 States is in the right place to really highlight right now. I was in, transitioning. I had just lost that job, and I wasn't able to give 50 States the attention that I needed to give it, and it was really discouraging to me at that point. And so you're like, oh, you should come talk about it. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm in the right place for that. But yeah, and so we literally just launched the website like last week, because we redid the site, and so it's definitely not perfect right now. I'm still working on it literally while I'm up here in Canada, trying to get artists added to the pages and different things. But we've moved from a pre-order model to an on-demand model, so you can order a shirt and it gets shipped to you now, which has been a ton of work going into that, but we're super stoked moving forward. We've also changed our name to 50 States Supply. So we've got some cool things coming down the line that will be more than just apparel minded, really highlighting local makers of things and connecting with them, helping them promote their products.
So I have a bunch of your shirts because I love them, and so Brian White, that was the Kansas shirt. That's one of my favorite shirts. Amy also made the Georgia shirt. I think it's Georgia on my mind. And I don't know if Amy made that North State one, but I don't know who made the North.
2 of them she did.
Yeah, so the North Carolina North State one?
Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought. Anyway, and I pulled that one up, so you guys got to see that one. And then Casey Brabs did the Florida shirt. Kirsten Bencombo, I don't know how to say her last name, but she's awesome, and she brings her dog to Creative South. She has a great story. I'm hoping she'll be on if I can get her to come on. And then but it's people or people who are really proud of their state or a place that they visited. Vaughn has his Oregon shirt, and Regime just said David loved 50 States, something to be working on some designs. And I just yeah, Anna said both are UCF grads, and I think Kirsten and Casey, and I just think they're really good quality shirts, first of all, and they're really soft, and they also have women's sizes, so I appreciate that it's not that I have to buy a tint,
Yeah.
But one thing I loved was I had told the student, I said, did you think that David was really bragging when he was talking about 50 states? And she was like, no. And I was like, well, then that people want to be on board with you. They want to get excited about your projects too. And I feel like you've done really well with getting people on board and not being super prideful, and also like letting them be a part of it, because this really is a community kind of thing. So I love that part, and I love that it's struggling, but it's just like what you said about Microsoft. They're just a little bit ahead on that same scale that we're all on. It's the same road. We don't all know everything we're doing, and we're figuring out as we go. So I feel like that those are some of the things that we need to remember,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, it's definitely been a process, and it's one of those things where you push it forward a little bit at a time, and trying to turn it around and make it more about the community, because like I'm just the guy behind the scenes trying to make it all work, and all the orchestrating all the what's the word for that? All the, printing and
Right.
getting the shirts brought in, and I forget, logistics. That's the word I
Yeah.
was looking for. I'm just the guy doing the logistics. At the end of the day, these are designers that do amazing work and they're contributing. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it. I would say, like, as far as talking about your work in front of people and not feeling like you're bragging, one of the biggest things is thinking about it as how your experiences can help others. And when you think of it from that lens, you're not focused on like making yourself look good. You're more focused on what can I share that will help other people, inspire them.
Mm-hmm.
Another piece of that is you've got to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly all together, right? Like you can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm all buttoned up, everything's perfect, I never do any bad work. you know
Right.
um, you've got to tell the downs with the ups, and I think that helps also humanize you more and make you realize, like, hey, like, he may have done some cool stuff, but he's also, for every one thing he did that was awesome, there were like 5 or 6 things he did that were horrible or that failed, it didn't go well. And that's one of the things that we haven't talked about on here, just time wise, but there's been, I forget the number, like 4 or 5 different companies that I've tried to make happen and failed. And there's a lot of disappointment there. It's hardship, but the biggest thing is learning from those failures and then moving forward and saying, okay, what can I do now based on the things that I've learned?
I totally agree. And I do think those failures, I think you talking about those failures or getting let go or all these things and just that you didn't give up is somebody needs to know that it didn't all just go smoothly. And I feel like it's hope, right? We're giving people hope that even when something bad happens or if something fails, like you had another t-shirt company, right?
Yep. Fun is awesome, it was called.
Yeah, fun is awesome. And then you ended up having a whole bunch of extra t-shirts in your garage,
Yeah, I
right?
still have some in my closet at home if any of you want any.
So Maria said it's the power of grit. It is that determination not to, and it's about focus. Like you have this bigger thing, you think this will be awesome, but maybe you didn't know your customers. Well, now, and then you did 50 states, so it was all 100% guaranteed, right? Because it was pre-order, and now you've moved past that because you see you can't just go from one side to the other. Is somewhere nice in the middle that you kind of have to find.
And it's been learning all of those little intricacies all along to really understand it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up all your vacations, but David, thank you so much. So I'm going to share a bunch of different ways for people to get in contact with you. So if you want to check out 50 states and buy one of those awesome shirts, you can go to 50, like 50, statessupply.com. And they're all in the chat. I'm going to put them all in the chat. You can find David at davidpohara.com in the chat. You can get to Dribbble, like I mentioned. I'm going to do Dribbble, Twitter, and Facebook and Instagram all in the same, and that's just David P. O'Hara. So on Instagram, David P. O'Hara. On Twitter, David P. O'Hara. Same thing on Dribbble and Facebook. And then LinkedIn, guess what it is, people? It's David P. O'Hara. But you just got to remember that Patrick, because there's that other David O'Hara. So don't. I mean, you could click on that guy too. He's probably great, but he's
probably
not
a cool
this.
guy.
Do you know him?
I don't, but he sounds like he has a cool name.
He's a great name. And then you can always email. I always like it when people give emails, but I'm going to go ahead and share your email. Oh, Nancy had a question. Her niece works at, let me tell you your email first real quick. David at davidpohara.com. If you want to ask questions or talk about anything with 50 states, or if you want one of those fun is awesome shirts, right? They can email you.
Absolutely. They can.
So Nancy had a question because her niece works at Airbnb. Hannah Hughes, I think, and I'm just going
cool.
from Did you interview with Hannah?
I interviewed with about 8 people there, so their names probably run together a bit for me, but I'll have to look her up. Hannah, what am I write it down?
Okay.
It's possible because they have like over 100 designers, from what I understand. And to me, I was like, wow, that is a huge like group of designers, and how they even organize that. It's pretty incredible. Like, definitely the Airbnb team impresses me a lot. So.
Yeah. She's in UX management, she says.
Okay, cool. I interviewed with two of their UX managers, and then two more joined for my portfolio review. So I'll have to look it up and see. Hannah Hughes.
Yeah, Hannah Hughes. Anyway, so thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it. I always find it encouraging, and I love that you are willing to share, and I just like you. You're so nice.
Oh, well,
So
thanks, Dan. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm honored that you wanted to have me on the show.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so one, you can always email me at diane@rechargingyou.com. That's the best way to get to me. But then you can always follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Design Recharge. And if you have an idea for the show, or you have somebody you just really want to come on, please send me an email about it. Also, I would love if you give us a rating on iTunes. I would love that tremendously. And just remember, I'm doing the recruiting creatives. I kind of had to put it on. I was going to really start it, like really push it September 1st, but I really had some other stuff going on, like school, so I couldn't really do it. So I'm hoping November 1st is really going to be when I'm starting to get back with people, which really sounds like I don't have my stuff together. But maybe I don't. Maybe that's my valley, and I'm just trying to do it. So, I just thank you guys for coming every week, and I really appreciate it. And I'm going to tell you one thing once we get off screen. So hold on for that. Hang on. Let me hit stop.